Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition. We turn now to poem 378, I Saw No Way, the Heavens Were Stitched. And we will see this poem in connection to the previous two poems, that is to say in 376, Of Course I Prayed, and 377, To Lose One's Faith Surpass. Now, some have called this the third poem in a row of theological bleakness. I think in some ways it's clear that what Emily's doing here is she's playing with the John 14:6 passage where Christ declares, I am the way, the truth, and the life. The idea that there's something one wants so desperately to believe in, a path, a way. And of course we immediately think of our Dante, don't we, in the Divine Commedia. We've given full lectures at LearnStrong.net. But as well that notion that there's a path that I can figure out a way to act that maybe will allow me to have some faith and some belief. And she'll argue in this poem that this is extremely difficult once one feels trapped, once one feels excluded or outside. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've worked through our set of introductory comments as well as our preceding 377 poems. If you have, then you can place this poem in context. We're obviously doing it with the previous two. The great scholar Eberwing has pointed out that Emily is constantly seeing life as a circuit or a circle, and in that regards, we're going to play the game again here. But we're now with a trapped Emily. Maybe trapped, several scholars have pointed out, by the narrowness of the traditional church life that Emily would have been raised around. So this is how she says it in answer to the John 14:6 verse. I saw no way. The heavens were stitched. I felt the columns close. The earth reversed her hemispheres. I touched the universe, and back it slid, and I, alone, a speck upon a ball, went out upon circumference, beyond the dip of Bell. Now this dip of Bell is the buoy that will mark the harbor. So we're playing that game of what are the boundaries, the circumference that we might say. In other words, how far is Emily willing to go? And long, before any of us would be studying our Vygotsky and the zone of proximal development and Piaget's ideas about how we learn and how we go out into this unknown area to try and somehow reclaim something for ourselves of the knowledge. Emily is playing the game magnificently in a brilliant poem like this. She'll begin by saying, I tried, and I just couldn't see it. Everything for Emily, again, always back to this perspicacity. I think she learned it from her study of Plato and Republic. And of course, the whole notion of the cave allegory. And remember, the sun is always allegorically significant of what you can know, the path, the way. You'll remember that for Dante in the Divine Commedia, that he starts out trapped in the darkness, lost in the middle of a dark wood. So she says, I saw no way. And then a dash. And then the heavens were stitched. Notice heavens capitalized here. The idea, no way to get out, trapped, if you will, right? This is back to this opening line in 377, to lose one's faith. Stitched. It was everything was withheld from me. And then she goes from I saw to I felt, right? I felt the columns closely trapped. And it's an amazing idea, the columns in a portico, for example. Some of you will maybe read this as the columns that the blind Samson will stand between at the end of the Samson story. Certainly Emily could be channeling that idea. And then notice she goes from the very specific of the columns now from back out to the earth, right? The earth reversed her hemispheres. Some have read this as possibly a moment of release, right? And I touched the universe. I can't help but read this and think about Keats's when I have fears that I may cease to be, that on the shore of the wide world I stand alone and think, till love and fame to nothingness do sink. Again, to step away and try and see it all from a universal perspective. She says, notice, we go from seeing to feeling to touching now. The universe, and then back it slid. And I alone, we'll see this I alone one other time in her poetry in poem 1079. A speck upon a ball. Notice we're going to go from ball to bell. A speck upon a ball. It is remarkable that she says, I was so stitched, I couldn't get out. And then all of a sudden I got out, and all I could see was that I was this small speck up on this huge ball of a globe, right? And then went out upon circumference. You'll remember in poem 313, it was this new circumference beyond the dip of Bell, the bouncing of the buoy on the harbor waters that's telling us where the boundaries are. I can't help but think that when we get to poem 437, we're going to come back to this poem. Prayer is the little implement through which men reach where presence is denied them. They fling their speech by means of it in God's ear. If then he hear, this sums the apparatus comprised in prayer. Some have read this as another Emily prayer. Well, what exactly is it that she's arguing at 2a here? I think her argument is that it's so hard to feel stitched, to feel trapped, to not know exactly how one is supposed to go. And of course at 2b, the language of, we might call it the language of struggle, the language of stitched. I mean, hear the words, right? Just the power. And it's almost like a sense of imbalance, or almost like some scholars have called it vertigo. So notice we go from stitches to columns to hemispheres to a touchable and sliding universe to finally a ball, and then a bell is where we finish at 3a. I think Keats's When I Have Fears does come to mind here. The way in which Keats is constantly struggling as well to try and find the proper perspective. We mentioned, obviously, Plato's Republic, and especially Republic 7 and the Cave Allegory. We've given full lectures on these texts at learnstrong.net. Finally, at 3b, to own a text like this, when was a time that you felt stitched? When was a time that you felt somehow that you got out of it, but then you saw yourself a speck on a ball, insignificant in some profound way? And to what degree is Emily challenging? I hope that she is. Thank you.